acceptance. Yeah, and used to practice acceptance and commitment therapy with women in recovery coming out of the 3 women's prisons in my state in Ohio. And then really recognizing that a lot of the coping skills that I wanted to teach or to implement in our institutions were really hard due to lack of access to nature, lack of access to silence, to space, to things that are easy to take for granted. And anybody who works in corrections know that it's a really dehumanizing space. But the one bright light, there were many bright lights, but my brightest light at the women's prison was that we did a program with the Ohio Wildlife Center where different animals that were needing to be rehabilitated but needed constant care went to the women who had been trained as wildlife rehabbers. And it was just a really beautiful program. And then we had our Greyhound rehabilitation program for dogs coming out of racing backgrounds and then moving into learning how to be in a home and how to be settled and helping teach people how to welcome these really amazing dogs into their life. And so those programs have really low recidivism rates for the women who went home, and they made a really big impact on the community, but they also helped change the way when I talked about women that were incarcerated, it changed the way that the community interacted with them. And we had a lot of conversations about why animals and wildlife are just so healing in prison and how ways we could find them in really small ways, even if we didn't have consistent access, even if you can't go on a hike or have a garden or have a plant in your house, you can still have access to animals, you can still have access to nature, and those add value to our life. So that fast forward, and I was getting my master's, and I had already been involved volunteering with the Sierra Club, and the Citizen Climate Lobby, and really interested in the environment. And I was noticing that a lot of my friends who had worked so hard to get jobs in the environmental space and in the animal care space in zoos and conservation facilities were burning out and leaving in similar rates as social workers. And I was like, that's interesting. I hadn't really connected how much vicarious trauma they were experiencing in that field. And so I started doing research on ecological grief, specifically in Ohio and in the Midwest. Most of my research is with Appalachian communities that experience mountaintop removal. And I think One Health is such a beautiful model for that because it really shows up. Communities don't only mourn the loss of a landscape they loved, but then the land has changed, so traditions have to change, and you have cultural loss if you aren't able to identify animals because they're no longer there, if you're not able to forage, if you're not able to grow the crops that you have in the past, there's this cultural loss and this physical loss. And so I started off researching ecological grief, specifically with environmental organizations and frontline responders, because there's already a lot of research on communities experiencing loss, but not a lot on the first responders, and environmental organizations are first responders, even though they don't always have access to the same funding. And then that resulted in people wanting more care and more attention. And so now I consult with environmental organizations, and a lot of it's still focused on grief, like how can we take space to grieve in environmental organizations where you constantly are responding to new challenges and new legislation and harms. But we also now look at strategic planning and how can we include wellness and what we know about climate emotions like eco-anxiety and eco-grief into strategic plans. And how can we measure those in the community so that when we do advocacy, we can include the mental health impacts of climate injustices in our advocacy. So that's like my version of eco-social work. It's a little messy and I'm still figuring it out. I'm grateful that Chris is here because he's been one of my mentors and one of the first social workers I met who works for an environmental organization, but he's not alone. There's lots of us. So I'll hand the mic over to him because that was a long-winded answer.
It's funny how you say I'm your mentor, but yet you're the one who's connecting me with these great organizations. So thank you for that, Bailey. I'm always glad to hear and happy to hear some of the work that Bailey's doing. As she said, I'm Chris Colón. I'm the Northeast Ohio Regional Director for the Ohio Environmental Council, OEC Action Fund. I'm also the co-founding executive director of Thrive Mahoning Valley. It's a nonprofit that works here in the Mahoning Valley to increase population through welcoming newcomers, immigrants, refugees, that type of work. But my current passion, the current work that I focus all of my time on is environmental social work. I just to take a quick leap back, all the way back, I grew up here in Youngstown, Ohio. If anyone is familiar with Youngstown, Ohio, it is what we call a declining Rust Belt community. We had, large steel mills, largest population in the state of Ohio for so long, and it's been declining ever since. However, over the last few years, I have noticed some things that are more positive, and thus my work with Thrive is growing. But growing up here, things were difficult. It was a very rough childhood. Didn't have a lot of support, and needless to say, that some traumatic things happened in my life that led me into the field of social work, like a lot of people. And so I don't think my story is unique in any way except for where I ended up. And so through the years, I've worked in nursing homes, I've worked in hospitals, I did hospice, did a brief time doing some marketing in the home healthcare and hospice space before, I started consulting with nursing homes and their social work programs and their quality improvement, through, helping through surveys and things like that for quite some time. Started working at Humana as a care manager, did that for about 2 years before Humana decided that they were going to eliminate the program. I didn't mind. They gave us a nice, huge, I say huge because from Youngstown, Ohio, it was huge, severance package, and it afforded me to finish my master's degree and connect in the nonprofit space, which is where I started to find my passion. Starting around, I guess I should say that I graduated from Youngstown State University in 2000 with my bachelor's in social work. And have been a member of NASW and have my license since then. And so, super excited to continue all these years later and following up with social work and some of the programming and stuff like that. But so about 5 years ago, I got burned out working in nursing homes. I think anybody who's worked in nursing homes knows that the amount of documentation, the amount of follow-up, the amount of planning, the amount of MDSs, amount of PASSARs and screenings and everything else gets kind of frustrating after a while, especially with the decrease in funding that the healthcare industry continues to experience. I'm not ashamed to say that I got burnt out. And so I left the industry altogether. And followed a dream that I had as a young person, which was to be an activist. I got kind of stunted in that because I became a single father. I raised my son for 14 years by myself. And so I wasn't able to be that activist. And so I said, when I lost that job at Humana, I'm going to go be the activist I always wanted to be. I started connecting with foundations and leadership training programs in a nonprofit space. Ended up starting my own nonprofit in Thrive Mahoning Valley. And while I did that, I went and started counseling children in the Youngstown City school system. If anybody knows the Youngstown City school system, it is one of 2 systems in the state of Ohio that have been taken over by the state. And so there's a lot of needs and wants in this area. I did that for 2 years, and then COVID happened. And so I think for a lot of people, it changed their trajectory in their lives and in their work, and it did so for me as well. I had no place to do therapy with kids, where I've become such a personable person who was able to connect with his kids through personal experience and things like that. It was hard. I wasn't able to see them in school, wasn't able to see them in an office space. Many times wasn't able to see them in their home for multiple reasons. And so ended up doing a lot of my programming, a lot of my counseling sessions with the kids in local parks, walking through neighborhoods, and started seeing tons of improvement. I started seeing the kids start to make progress. And I couldn't figure out, the only thing I was doing different was I was out in nature with the kids, being active, talking about plants, talking about wildlife, because I had just done naturalist training as well. And, there was some success. I started discharging kids where other counselors in the agency weren't during the pandemic. I started connecting kids to programs and athletics and things like that they hadn't done before. My agency saw that and said, hey, we want you to design a program around this. Here, I think it's 2 years later now, the program is being used in all of 4 different school systems here through that organization, which, they own it. It's not mine. I work for them, even though I made it. It's theirs. And so I don't get to see the fruits of that anymore, because I also got burnt out doing that. Mental health is a tough field. And through the work I was doing with the kids, I came to realize I had my own traumas that weren't necessarily being addressed in the right way. And I wasn't able to be the best social worker, the best counselor I could for the kids until I did. And so, again, I took some more time off, went out west, visited some national parks, experienced some time with nature. I feel like, and I'll tell people this to the day I die, I feel like I was almost healed when I was sitting in Death Valley and pondering my next steps in life. I feel like I was healed of some of my trauma. And I feel like through that, I was able to come back and try to figure out what my next steps were, because I enjoyed counseling kids, but I was burnt out, and an experience kind of fell in my lap to work in the nonprofit, the Ohio Environmental Council, around promoting land, air, and water protections for all that call Ohio home. That includes our animal friends as well as our human friends. And so I've been doing that work for almost 2 years now. Through that work, one of my passions is building up new leaders, whether it's environmental work or any other type of work. And so that's how Bailey and I kind of met. I really got involved in our Ohio Environmental Leaders Initiative, and which Bailey participated in. And, I'm doing this Building a Better Table series here in Youngstown now, where we're training up new organizers in the community and new social workers to follow different paths. And so, it's a lot of exciting work. Most of it revolves around environmental justice and promoting a future for green energy jobs in this region, an area that has lost, like I said, a ton of population. We have the potential now to bring in immigrants and refugees and people from all over the country who are seeking to move because of climate change. We're primed to bring them into, these future jobs, whether that's green energy, whether that's, green manufacturing, whatever it is in this community that we're kind of focusing on. There is a lot of EV manufacturing going on here. There's a lot of focus on these types of jobs. And so it's where my work is kind of leading. I've been kind of humbled to hear I'm a pioneer in the environmental social work field. I think that's just because I'm old now. At going on 42 years old, I feel like, I feel like I'm old now, but other people tell me I'm not. But I'm excited to see the changes and the transition in the social work field. I didn't know that there was a veterinary social work field out there, and I'm excited to learn more. So when I'm going to the university and talking to the students about my field of social work, I can say, hey, I even know veterinary social workers now. And so I would also love to hear more about that. And but yeah, that's where I'm at now, what my work kind of consists of. The intersection between climate and immigration is kind of where my passion's kind of taken me right now. And and it's kind of where my expertise lies. So I'd love to hear any questions you all might have about the work I'm doing, but I also want to hear about the work you all do in veterinary social work, because again, I haven't been exposed to that in the past. So that's it.
My mind's like going in so many different directions. It's so like, it all makes sense. I feel like people have that experience with veterinary social work too. Like when they hear it, they're like, oh, well, yeah, why wouldn't that exist? But yeah, that is so cool. Oh.
If I can jump in, you both, Bailey and Christopher, you make my heart sing. So what's so cool is Christopher, I share your age. And I've been in the veterinary field for 20 years. And during my social work for my master's, I became super attached to what we call new Americans. So immigrant and refugee community in Syracuse. And in that, I really found my way, which was out of veterinary social work and out of the veterinary field, just to work with folks and see the injustice that is occurring every day, right? So I really embedded myself in this population, and I love it. So that's so exciting to hear. The other thing is, Bailey, you talked about One Health, and I wonder, and I put in the chat, the One Welfare. So I did this policy paper on the Farm Bill. And the Farm Bill is an expansive $490 billion bill that's looked at every year every 4 to 5 years, I should say. And sometimes it's not instituted to 5 to 7 years. And it's one of the bills that can actually be changed by stakeholders. And the ASPCA is actually putting into this farm bill their own thought about what it looks like to have us take better care of our environment and our animals. And so it's really cool. So if it's something you haven't looked at, I think that would be neat for you to see how they're really petitioning for this change. And then that's where I came into One Welfare, which is similar to One Health in the way of the components of the environment, our animals, and how we, we serve them, right? And also our mental health. So mental health of farmers, mental health of Bailey, so cool. You are doing something that I proposed and didn't even know it was being done, which was helping those who are looking at things like the environmental, I think you said ecological grief. How amazing is that? Like, I was like, what would it look like for the people that are first responders to this? Like, they have to feel it in their hearts, right? To see with the devastation that's happening. So, oh my gosh, you think that like the veterinary stuff's so cool, but this is so cool. You guys, you're blowing my mind in the work that you're doing. And I think it's so interwoven in the veterinary community, in that we know that our grief, grief is similar. A loss is similar. And just learning that there are such things out there and that you're taking this, like you're spearheading this, is just amazing. So like I'm saying, you're singing to my hearts, because I am in the veterinary social work, field where I'm getting pretty, I won't even say good, but I'm getting to recognize by my colleagues what this looks like. But the fact that you are helping in this significant portion of the environment and other things is just, it's absolutely amazing. So thank you. And thank you, Augusta, for having them here today. This is such a happy surprise for me, because it's the work like I said, I was researching in policy. So this is amazing.
I love it. I mean, if that is like, if one person walks away from these chats like inspired, like then goal accomplished. So yeah. I think I could give a little spiel about vet social work, because I mean we have a few of our members on here, but so it was coined 20 years ago by Dr. Elizabeth Strain out of University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where it comprised of 4 different areas. So it was compassion, fatigue, and burnout among animal care professionals. The link between human and animal violence. So we see a lot of with hoarding cases, domestic violence, interpersonal violence, and then animal assisted interventions. So canine therapy, equine therapy, things like that. And then, oh my gosh, pet loss and grief and bereavement. And so and over these 20 years, it has kind of morphed now to include the larger scale, such as like Liz was saying, the farmers' relationship with their animals and the environment and the loss at on conservation levels and things like that. But I feel like a lot of us do animal assisted interventions and a lot of us do veterinary social work where we're embedded in animal clinics and teaching hospitals, but there's a lot of that in between. So with the association, we're just trying to grow and expand that, and bring, if you have any sort of connection with the human animal bond, you're a part of vet social work in my eyes. So that's in a nutshell what we do. The association formed out of the University of Tennessee following one of our summits. So every other year we host a summit where there's a number of topics, including those 4, but it's been growing every year, which is really exciting. But it came out of our 2018 and it has morphed into what we have now. There's textbooks on this topic now, there's research, there's articles, podcasts, everything. And I feel like it's just, I'm sure you've experienced in your own field, it's just exploded, especially after COVID, when everybody had really formed strong attachments with their animals. And we started seeing this One Health or this One Welfare concept explode. So it's definitely gaining a lot of traction right now, which is exciting. And that's what we need.
Well, I feel like, Liz, I know you'll appreciate this, but veterinary social work has inspired a lot of the eco-social workers I have interacted with. Like, especially when we're looking at ecological grief, I feel like everyone pre-term veterinary social work who is doing the work and now who identifies and has done the training for veterinary social work, like giving folks permission to grieve their pets and having supports in place, having practices in place has been a really helpful model for me when I'm working with clients who know that they're mourning, like they know that they're feeling loss around nature and landscapes or species of wildlife, but they can't conceptualize like how you would come together, because mourning is such a beautiful collective social practice when we do it. And when we come together to mourn, it's just so powerful. Like, we lost a cat in our neighborhood a few weeks ago that everybody loved. Like, our whole neighborhood loved the cat. And before the cat, Lucy, had passed away, I only knew one of my neighbors' names, and now I've met like 17 of them. And we have each other's phone numbers, and we were all checking in on everybody and coming together to grieve Lucy. And it's the same thing with landscapes, like being able to hold memorials, being able to write obituaries, being able to come together and sing songs, being able to, and to Chris's point, acknowledge that these practices are new to a lot of Western cultures, but not to Indigenous cultures who have had practices for mourning losses around nature and wildlife for as long as we know. So yeah, vet social work has really inspired a lot of, I think, freedom and concepts and frameworks to be able to mourn ecological losses, particularly in the zoological field where they have these close relationships with non-domesticated species, and the grief is complicated by feelings of guilt or the recognition that a particular animal represents a really big loss if it's an endangered species, and feeling like that urgency and then the spike in eco anxiety. So I'm really grateful for everything that's happening in veterinary social work, past, present, and future, because it's really opened up, I think, a lot of ways to have conversations in Western cultures that we didn't have before.
Thank you both so much for the explanation. I'm super intrigued, and I think this is something we definitely need. So I know last year when I lost my karma, I could have used someone to talk to about it, and I still cry about it. So.
Yeah. I think one of like my questions or interest is, you touched on it a little bit, Bailey, but it feels so big, you know, the loss of landscape, the environment, the climate. How do you help? Like, how do you help process that when it feels so big and out of your control? And like the rituals behind that.
Chris, I'd really like to know your answer to this. There is good research and more research coming on risk and protective factors of who's most impacted by climate injustices in regards to their mental health. And there's some really beautiful protective factors, like when we're talking about like the work Chris has done with youth and doing therapy in parks. Like, we have therapists that are doing therapy with bird watching. And in addition to, one, you're getting the therapeutic intervention of having someone support you in processing these big feelings and addressing that they're systemic and that oppression is involved in the mental health impact that you're experiencing. 2, you're outside, you're getting the benefits of being in nature. But 3, the youth that are engaging, or the clients, if they're older adults as well, are engaging in citizen science. So they're using the Merlin Bird app, if you've never heard of it, through Cornell University. And so it's a great app. It's really fun for bird enthusiast or bird novice. You can take pictures or record audios, and it helps you identify the birds. But all that research goes back to Cornell. So now they're getting more information from people in the community about what birds are in their area, you know, population counts, if birds are in areas at different times, like if they're migrating sooner. And so that's one of the things that one of the therapists I refer clients to does, is he's showing that even in like engaging in your self-care, you're also contributing to something bigger. We know that anytime we take care of ourselves, you're contributing to something bigger. But in the environmental space, for concerned community members, a lot of times we look at building that like-minded community or engaging in citizen science, so actionable things where you have a supportive community and you know that you're contributing to the, but for folks who work in the environmental field, a lot of times it's helping them develop coping skills that aren't related to nature, because it can be so hard if you're protecting the land that you live on or that you love to not think about work when you're trying to do something you love, like hiking or kayaking. And so a lot of times with organizations, I'm looking more at how do we build practices into your organization and resources for folks at home where they're able to decompress. Like, how can you tune into community? How can you tune into yourself, opposed to always looking out into your landscape and feeling fear? And one of the big things that's the most exciting to me is that celebrations are a huge protective factor. And so a lot of it has been looking at practices to help people celebrate environmental wins. Like Chris has a huge list of beautiful things that are happening right now in his community that he's been a part of. And there are climate wins every single day. Like there's whole Instagram accounts dedicated to it, because people need to know that, like, yes, you need to be aware of how severe the threats are, and we need to be participating in solutions, but amazing things are happening every second of every day. Like I've never had a day where I didn't have a client or a community member or somebody share a climate win with me. And it's like, we never celebrate them because there's 17 other problems happening that we feel like we need to address. And like celebrating as more than just like putting it in a newsletter that goes out to your agency. Like, how do you take time to shake, to dance, to sing, to be in community and celebrate something? We could geek out about that for years, but I want to hear Chris's response to that question because he's brilliant.
Yeah, your response is way more brilliant than I was ever gonna say. So how am I working to combat this all? So, I am almost ashamed to say that, the approach we have is not so grassroots. Is where my heart has always been, in grassroots work, activism, where I'm now with OEC. We're what we call grass tops. We connect to policy, we connect to things on the state level and the national level. And so my job is connecting that work on the local level. And so when we have policy wins, or we have a successful lawsuit against the Ohio EPA or the federal EPA or something like that, it's how does that relate, and how does that affect my community? Most often than not, there's very little connection. But so it's about addressing the larger scale and the more systemic issues. Recently, one of the issues I've been working a lot on is what happened in East Palestine, Ohio. I don't know if those of you who live in other states are aware, but we had a huge train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, where subsequently they released very harmful and cancer-causing chemicals into the atmosphere. And so for the past 4 months, since February now, 3 months since February, there's been massive cleanup going on, residents displaced and moving back into the community. And so I've been working very closely with the local residents and local organizers to amplify their calls as a small rural community to the state level and to the national level. And so we've helped draft the Bipartisan Rail Act that you all are hearing about on the news with JD Vance and Sherrod Brown. We helped draft that legislation. I worked very closely in drafting some legislation on the state level with State House member Lauren McNally. And so the work is now at a higher level. However, the work I'm doing around the immigration stuff is still very grassroots. And so, we are advocating for the economic benefits of these communities and helping relocate individuals into our community, helping them connect to resources. And so, the work is very different on both of the things that I do. And so, I appreciate that I get to do some grassroots stuff, but at the same time, the real, and my opinion has changed on this. The real change is now being affected at the state level. It's not happening nationally. It's not happening locally, at least in my communities, in my state. It's happening at the state level. And so that's where we're kind of advocating right now, is changing some of this policy that's hurting the communities we all serve as social workers. So a little different than some of the stuff Billy's doing and her direct care, but yeah.
Well, it just shows the art of social workers, like all the different levels that we bounce in between.
Yeah. I also say, one of the ways I'm trying to do my best in affecting change in the future is working with those that are up and coming, whether it's going to social work classes at Youngstown State or OU Zanesville, and talking to these social workers about the work I do in environmental social work, environmental justice, and how it connects to social justice and social work has been something I've gained a lot of passion from. That came from doing a speech at the COSI Science Center in Columbus not too long ago. So I'm enjoying teaching, future social workers what they could get involved with. And now I have a whole nother field of social work to talk to them about when I talk to them. And so that's exciting. But also, bringing up activist leaders in my community to fight for social justice and environmental justice and some of these issues that are dear to me and dear to this community, helping them, with the tools, talking a lot about self-care and self-interest, talking a lot about power mapping and working amongst communities and inciting action and when there's things that need action, and inciting discussion when there's things that incite discussion, and those types of things are all passions of mine. And so if I can play a role in bringing up any future leader, whether it's a social worker or not, that makes me feel good. So
that's another protective factor. Intergenerational relationships. This is super cool. So there's a small pocket of research that shows that adults working in the environmental justice field, when they have relationships with youth, whether that's through their volunteering or through their job role, they're more likely to be resilient when it comes to experiences of eco-anxiety or ecological grief, or the guilt and shame that can come up when there are losses around the environment. So look at you having a protective factor.
the other thing is I also educate a lot. I find that they're very important, and so I educate folks about how to live a more clean lifestyle when it comes to their own environmental practices. I have offset all of my carbon emissions in my lifestyle, and so I teach people how to do that when they have time. For instance, I just got married 2 weeks ago, and we had a complete zero waste wedding where everything was either composted or taken directly to a recycling site, and so I teach people how to do that kind of thing. Every event that I put on, whether it's with Thrive Mahoning Valley or Ohio Environmental Council, is certified zero waste. And unfortunately for some great meat eaters, that means providing vegan meals and vegetarian meals whenever we can. And so, I'm not vegetarian, I'm not vegan, but I live my life that way. I sneak in meats from time to time, but for the most part, I am completely carbon neutral in my lifestyle. So I do teach people how to do that.
Well, I'm just getting excited because now we can just add more of this for future summits and just exploding or sharing and exposing.
I didn't know you had a summit, and I want to be involved in some way.
We do. Yes. Our next one's going to be in the, early fall of 2024. So.
Somewhere fun?
Hmm?
Somewhere fun?
I don't know. I don't know if it's fun, but it will be in person. So, and probably close to you in Bailey.
Okay.
So.
Then it will be fun.
Yes, we always make it fun. The summits are always fun and always exciting. And I mean, the networking that just comes out of it alone is super. It's probably one of my favorites. So yes.
So the gears were moving in my brain as both Bailey and Christopher were talking. Bailey, you brought up about the protective factors of youth with those who are teaching or educating. And similar to attachment theory in California, they worked with the older population and children to be able to see how they benefit and how. I just wonder if there's some sort of research that could be similarly modeled to that. Because, as you said, Bailey, you model much of what you do with your grief work from veterinary social work. So Christopher, do you have time to write some research on what it looks like for, getting those in population who enjoy and want to educate about the environment to the youth that that you're working with? I think that would be interesting.
I wish I had time to do research. As I just mentioned, I just got married and I've also got a 9-month-old at home. So there's no time for anything.
Perhaps you can come to
I would love to be
what
involved.
Augusta was saying and just like propose this. And there's researchers all the time that want to do really cool stuff. So
Absolutely. I'm willing to do everything I can as long as it can fit into my schedule. Yeah.
Yeah, well, do you guys have any recommendations of like where to go for research or, reputable sources and things like that? Because I know that's something that we are always looking to share with our members and stuff. And Bailey does a great job sharing it, but always the more the merrier.
Yeah, all of my stuff all of the recommendations I have are for climate emotion, so the mental health intersection with climate injustice. But I have a resource guide that I give to clients that I can share with Augusta to send out. There's a ton of great authors that have written really usable books. Some that are written for clinicians, but I've given to clients and friends. That's how user-friendly they are. And there's a few really prolific researchers that are really easy to follow. So I'll send that resource guide to Augusta if anyone wants to nerd out on mental health and climate injustice. But also the Climate Mental Health Network is an organization that's super active. And if you're on LinkedIn, they have a LinkedIn community group, and they post so many great things. They post proposals for if there are requests for proposals, people share out their research, people share out events. Yeah, that's a space where I learn a lot. And then there's also a listserv for eco-social workers. You'll get a ton of emails. Some of them will not be relevant. It's super international, which I think our member base would appreciate, because a lot of times I'll look at something and I'm like, it's a grant in Denmark, can't get it. But I'll add the listserv for eco-social workers to the email I send to Augusta. And that's just a nice space to stay connected. Sometimes students will email and they'll be looking for a mentor. So a lot of it's geared towards grant proposals or inviting people to events, but sometimes there's more community-minded things where people are looking to connect with other social workers that are in their field of interest within eco-social work, or they're just looking for a mentor or someone to connect with if they're new to the field.
Nice. Yeah, that would be great. Check that out. So I know.
Honestly, I've been a little disconnected from research lately. I'm not going to lie. So I'm not the first person to ask about research.
It's a beast. It is.
I think it's why I didn't become a professor, is because I don't want to do that crap.
Yeah.
It's a research assistant my last year in college, and I vowed to never do that stuff again. And then I had to go for a master's degree and I had to do it all over again.
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing, but I think the qualitative research that's really coming into fruition with science, that has been more of the philosophical or, other end of the spectrum, and not so much, especially in veterinary medicine, we don't see a lot of qualitative, but now with the new emerging fields, we're seeing how important that is, especially around grief. I have a friend, a colleague who has a grief support group who is writing her own research and has a grant out of Minnesota, Dr. Christina Kiefer, and she's doing a lot of grief work, and she's a veterinary surgeon and diplomat of sports medicine. And so Lap of was it not Lap of Love? That's Florida. I'll have to try to get I'll write it to you, Augusta, because she's still calling for people to come into her organization to help with her research. So and she's been a researcher. She actually has her PhD in regenerative medicine. So she told me how difficult it was to go from quantitative to qualitative, but she's loving it. So
skill set for sure. Now, have you guys seen, I guess, in your professional, have you seen like an uptick in more people wanting to be involved in nature-based intervention since COVID? Because I mean, I was a clinician during that time, and it was, let's meet outside, let's walk. And yeah, I feel like that it grew tremendously.
Yeah, I've been really impressed in my area in Central Ohio. There's a lot of clinicians that either fully do nature-based interventions, or one thing we've been working with our local NSAW Ohio chapter is to train clinicians to ask in their assessments about folks' relationship to the environment. I know that sounds really commonplace, but I think it was just like, we didn't used to ask about pets and what your relationship with animals was like in our assessments. And then we learned that that was a best practice. And it's the same with the environment. I have a few clinicians who are not comfortable at all being outside or being in nature, but they're learning that their clients have really strong relationships or really benefit from spending time outside. And in Columbus, I live in an urban area, and not every area is equally safe or accessible when we're talking about green space. So I've seen a lot of social workers launch, like Chris, into advocacy and activism around inequities in green space, but then also a lot of clinicians learning the challenges of how do we connect with nature even in an urban space, which you absolutely can. And that's one of the trainings that I like to do the best, because even with, I have clients that can't leave their homes. I have clients that are incarcerated in a number of ways, or, don't have freedom of movement. And so we're finding ways, no matter what level they're at, to make sure that people have access to nature and can benefit from, the mental health growth that we see when people are connected to nature. So yeah, I've seen a huge uptick in the number of clinicians that are now asking about that in their assessments, and in the number of private practice and organizations that are looking about how to incorporate that into their mission, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, and when I did my speech with the IAVSW Ohio, that was the main, takeaway from my speech, was calling for all psychosocial assessments to include questions about connection to nature, connection to other living things, and connection to the climate overall. It's amazing how many people are completely affected by climate change and just changes in temperature on a daily basis. And so these questions, I think, are integral. And for people to be able to move past some of the issues that they're having, we have to explore those and how it might be able to help.
Oh, that's great insight, because
I'm
I
happy
didn't
that
even think.
about it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was gonna say, Bailey, I haven't heard a lot of people saying that they're including it in their assessments yet. So I'm glad that you mentioned that they are. Sorry, Augusta.
No, I was going to say the exact same thing. Like we're still fighting to get them to ask about their non-human family members in the house. And it makes so much sense, because just personally, when I moved from North Carolina up to Maine, everyone's like, she seems so much happier in Maine. I was like, yeah, because the climate is so much better for my mental health. And we see like seasonal depression and things like that. So again, I think we just were never taught, and it was never exposed. But when we hear about it, we're like, oh, that makes sense. Like, yeah, why wouldn't we? So.
The stats are clear. If folks live close to a park, they're happier, or close to green spaces, or closer to water, they're happier. Folks who live next to factories and in industrialized areas have higher levels of stress, higher levels of mortality, higher levels of infant mortality. There's so many more negative outcomes. And so, that has to be, an integral part of any assessment, in my opinion. Were you showing us something, Bailey? I'm sorry.
She's better lighting.
Yeah, I'm like such an
So,
old lady. I never want to turn my lights on. And so the sunset in my favorite spot in my house. So I had to find a new spot.
Like a cat. You gotta move with the sun. No. Well, I don't know. I know we had a lot of listeners today, but if you guys had any questions or if you don't get a chance to put it in the chat, reach out to me. I can forward it. Or I know they also put their email in the chat, but again, if you can't get to it, I'm happy to provide it. Yeah. As always, I enjoy it, and people can hang out, ask more questions, or just connect.
I was looking at the Morning Pause site. That's interesting.
Oh. I love I like download all the sites, and I keep it up and watch it the next day, do my research.
Yeah, Christopher, I agree with you. Research is difficult. It can be difficult. And I wonder if we go into the work we do, I mean, just like you said, like if you add in this biopsychosocial, like the climate, environment, nature, and then what Augusta said, non-human families, like we don't, of course, we never did that in school. And we wonder about that. And we may do that as an individual therapist, but what would that look like if that was something that was added? And because we serve those who we call incarcerated, right, Bailey? So we serve those, and they're people, they're human beings that deserve to be looked at as a human being, and they deserve to be supported. And if we just generally ask these questions, and even if we as practitioners don't understand what that might mean, there may be a strength in there. There may be a protective factor in there. And so the more protective factors we have for our clients, and that's what we're looking at in our biopsychosocials, right? We're looking for all those strengths, the better off that we are if we can connect them. And so that's brilliant. And so right there, like even in the research, like I've asked half of my population this and half the other, and I've had this many more strengths in this. Now we can look back at retrospective studies, right? Not that you have time for that, Christopher, but we can look at those things and see how important this information is, for us, especially as there are scientists in the field that like to look at research and like to have this data.
Yeah. And what's cool is it can be really small. Like there's research when we're looking at nature connection that shows that even having artwork of nature in your home can have mental health benefits, especially related to cognition and stress. Having a houseplant has similar benefits. Giving clients access to information. I know a lot of clients love when they find out that plants can communicate with each other. And I think it's the same way people find when they're like witnessing animals communicate with each other. And it's so beautiful and social. Plants are social, and they have forms of communication that we can't hear, just like elephants can do those really low sonic communications. And yeah, I think everybody deserves and can have access to the mental health benefits of nature. And as a clinician, as a social worker on any level, whether it's direct care or macro, we should be working on making sure. And we also can, if we ask clients to describe their landscape, their environment, we can also find out, there's so many health hazards from pollutants in our community that mirror mental health symptoms. And the more information we have, if we're working with medical providers, then we're able to provide that to them, and we can start correctly diagnosing health conditions when we might be missing them. So there's only good things that come out of, well, in my opinion, that come out of asking those questions and getting that information.
All I know is I have a bunch of books and research to read. So, yeah. But do you have any other questions for us, Christopher? We asked you a lot. Do you have any for us?
No, and I think I froze there for a second, so I'm sorry, but no. No, I don't. I'm looking forward to staying connected with your group though in the future. So please, if there's anything I can come back to assist with or help out with,
Yeah, it's definitely something that we want to do more education and exposure around. So, yeah. Let me thank you. I will stop recording.